Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show on this Sunday the 19th of January, 2020. There's something I've been watching. Now listen, one of my other channels, I have done a show on this new virus that's in China right now. And I'm going to leave a link in the description. Encourage you guys to watch it all the way through. It's very interesting. Anyway, moving on. We've been looking for quite a while now for a black swan within the financial system. Something to come along out of nowhere. And basically, because we see an over-leveraged financial system. The corporate bond market in the United States is absolutely unreal. It's so over-leveraged right now. Leverage, when I talk about leverage, what I'm actually talking about is when they build up debt becomes credit, and the credit becomes leverage within the system. And an over-leveraged system doesn't react like a normal system. It can lead to tremendous volatility. Now, here's the thing. We've been looking for a black swan for a long time now. We knew it was coming. A lot of us, financial trends forecasters and people who deal with finance on the internet have been talking about this black swan coming for a long time now. Well, it might be here. I've been doing close research into this new virus that's coming out of China, and one of the big things about this virus is how it would incapacitate, its ability to incapacitate, more so than its mortality rate. Its ability to incapacitate, and also it seems like it's spreading very quickly. They're talking now. They're saying by some estimates, experts are saying there could be 1,000 people that have it. Some experts are saying it could be 1,700, and I've heard some estimates as high as 3,000 people might have it. And they're judging this by the way it's spreading to other countries. It's spread to Japan. It's spread, it's spreading around to other countries within Asia. The thing is what would happen if a tremendous amount of the workforce fell ill or sick and was incapacitated for weeks or possibly even months, to our economy that's already over leveraged. The thing is world productivity is already starting to slump, and we see evidence of this now. The Federal Reserve has been front-running this slump in world productivity, which leads to a recession. Well, GDP numbers are down. Germany is so close to being in a recession right now, it's not even funny. And the German economy is huge. The same way with the United Kingdom. They're very close to recession territory. Just keeping their head above water, barely, And it's the same way with a lot of other countries. The world has become more or less a unit. Like the whole world right now, every country's dependent upon every other country. See, what happened is as we go back in time, if we progress back into the 1800s, early 1900s, and up to our day, what we see is every time we go back 10 years, and if we go back a 10-year increment, the world was less interconnected. We didn't have the internet. If we just go back 20 years, two of these 10-year increments, the internet wasn't what it is now at all. The internet has been one of the things that's been helping to connect the world together. But the way it is, if we have a cohesive world that's connected together through trade and through the banking system, and monetarily connected together through the FX markets and through the different markets, then if one part of the world goes down too much, it carries the rest of the world down with it. It works the same way through the food chain. If we have a whole bunch of small farms through the countryside, and each small farm is capable of producing product, say it's pork, then if we do get a disease on one of the pork farms, it's easy to isolate that disease and close down that farm, and all the other farms can keep producing pork. See? But if we were to move it all into one farm, all of our pork production, and then if that farm catches the disease, then all of our pork's gone. And it works the same way all the way through everything in our society. If we have everything isolated and individualized, it also works to prevent disease. The way it used to be in the old days, there's dotted farms across the countryside, and they were isolated communities. Now we've interconnected everything together. One of the ways we've interconnected everything together is through the transportation. We have these big jets constantly flying back and forth between every country. This didn't exist at one time. At one time, if you wanted to cross the Atlantic Ocean, you had to take a steamship. You had to book in advance, and you had to wait weeks. So if a virus were to prop up in a country, like say America caught a virus back in those days, well, it would be like you'd have to wait 3 weeks for your steamship to go across, and by that time, they would say, well, you're not taking this steamship because we've got a handle on this virus. There's a virus here. We're not going to board you. They'd have time to... But now, they're booking flights every day. Dozen flights going out, and somebody can hop on it with a virus and fly from one side of the world to the other and spread it. Everything, we think that by moving into this modern world with this modern technology that we've made things better, but in fact, we haven't. We've made things much worse for ourselves in every aspect of how we've centralized everything. Like take money, for instance. We used to have cash registers that used to just run on a hand. That guy pulls a handle down, it goes ka-ching, and the register opens up, and we used to use cash, which is not affected by the internet. Now, they've taken all those out to the scrapyard, junked them all, those cash registers, and replaced them with ones that need electricity. But that's just the first part. Then they junked all those and scrapped all those out, and now they got to be connected to the internet and have electricity both. So what if we're opening ourselves up to a problem? Because if there's an internet failure or an electricity failure, you can't even make transactions anymore. Where in the old days, they used to have small stores, and the guy inside could operate the cash register, and light would come in through the window, so he could do transactions even if there wasn't any power. Let's face it, in the Old West, all the stores were that way. Mercantile stores, they used to call them. And they didn't even have electricity. They had a pickle barrel in the middle of the room, and they had, and they had a bunch of chairs sitting around a fireplace, and the old timers used to sit around there and tell stories at the mercantile. This is something from our classic past. But it was a system that was much more indestructible than what we've built now. What we've built now is a system that has no redundant systems in place in case of failure, and we've went all hog into this new modern lifestyle that's dependent. It's all dependent. One thing is dependent on another thing. In the old days, they didn't have all these dependencies. So now, in order for the food to get to the store, it's dependent upon the trucks, and the trucks are dependent upon the banks, and the banks are dependent upon... It's all a dependent system. It's all interlinked together with chain. It's like a chain. If one link breaks, then the whole system breaks. You see what I mean? And this is what we've created for ourselves. We've created a system that's vulnerable, extremely vulnerable to anything that comes along. Now, back in 1918, they had a virus that spread around the earth that was very deadly for a flu epidemic. It was very deadly. Around 2 or 2.5% mortality rate, which is very high for a flu, because your typical flu only has about 0.1%. The typical flu we have every year, only has 0.1%. This flu that went around was called the Spanish influenza, had a very high mortality rate. Our ancestors were able to manage their way through, muddle their way through this worldwide epidemic, including world wars, and still managed to not have the world fall into complete and utter chaos. But what we've done is we've structured a system that's vulnerable now to chaos and vulnerable to if any little problem comes along or black swan event comes along. The system that we've created now is extremely vulnerable to these things. And we haven't put redundant systems in place in case of an emergency. Water would be one of the big things. All of our water distribution now, it all comes, most people are reliant, like in the old days, people used to have their well, and they would dip a bucket down into their well for water, and they might boil it on the wood stove, in the old days. They didn't have a problem. Their water delivery was themselves going out with the bucket. Maybe it's a crude, simple system, and we like our modern conveniences, our modern taps and hot water heaters and everything else. But, the city water supply comes, a lot of it's back pressured with these big towers, They have a tower. You've seen them in most towns and cities, have a tower up on a hill or near on a high place, and it's gravity fed, But they have redundant systems in place for water in the city. They have these big pumps and stuff for the big cities that run off of a big diesel generator, But they don't use these systems. And because they always rely upon the power never goes out in the big cities, so they don't need to use these redundant water systems. They're never used. They're sitting there with cobwebs on them. They might fire it up once every 6 months for a test to make sure the generator's working. That's it. Okay, system's working now, we're all set. Okay, wait until a major emergency. What if the power grid were to go down? And the city were to lose water pressure, and they turned on these systems. So say the power's out for 4 days in your big city, a city of 1 million or more people, right? So you think everything's great. They operate these big systems to keep the water pressure up, right? But you go over and you turn your tap on, it makes a few sputtering sounds, the air coming out, and then you put your cup underneath the tap, and because we've run out of bottled water, Edith, we've run out of bottled water, and so you go put your cup or maybe your pitcher underneath the tap, and you turn the tap on, it makes a few sputtering sounds, and all of a sudden this brown goop starts to come out. The smells. That's because the city, they don't run these systems but once every 6 months. So the water's been sitting in them for 6 months. What do you expect when the big diesel generators come on and they start to pressurize the city water with this water and then they put out a boil order, okay, in the city. But the power's out. How are the people going to boil the water? We don't think about things like this, But that's just the start. That's just the tip of the iceberg to what can happen when we've created a world for ourselves where there's so many dependencies. One thing depends upon another thing, depends upon another thing. And as it starts to break down, the system starts to break down, they don't have the redundant systems in place to get things up and running again. Anyway, I'm a little bit worried about this virus that's spreading through China. One of the reasons why I'm worried about it is I'm going to tell you my own opinion on this for a minute. When I see viruses that are extremely deadly, Like, say, rabies, for instance, right? Extremely deadly. It's almost 100% deadly. Okay? Viruses like that don't typically tend to spread wide, because they kill their host. And also, a secondary reaction is we become so frightened of them that we quarantine the virus naturally because we're frightened of it. Now, this is why we have the virus called the flu that spreads through our population every year, and everybody just says, well, it's the flu season. Like it's nothing, the flu season. That's because the flu only kills about 0.1% of the population, which is very small. Most people that catch the flu, you expect them to get better. Oh, Charlie's got the flu this week, yeah, he'll be back next week, don't worry. He'll be back to do his job next week, sort of thing, Don't worry. And this is why the flu is so successful. Because it's able to spread every year. And the reason why is because we don't have such a reaction to it to quarantine ourselves from it. To come after it and cancel it out and try to not quarantine areas off and say, okay, this flight can't fly across the Atlantic because somebody on it has a flu. We don't pay attention to that because it's not so deadly. Now, the SARS epidemic we had a few years ago was much more deadly than the flu. I think it was like 12% or something, or 14% mortality rate, which is very high. And that reaction did come from us to say, okay, we're going to clamp down on this thing, and we were very careful. And what happened is we stomped it out. We were successful because we took extraordinary measures to try to stop it because it was so deadly, And Ebola, look at the measures we take against Ebola. And, measures like this. And plus, another thing I've noticed is that when these diseases are more deadly, generally they're not so catchy. The flu's extremely catchy. And somebody can sneeze on a bus, and they can be sitting 5 seats behind you, and you don't touch them or anything, and you come down with the flu too. Just because they sneezed a few seats behind you on the bus, That's how catchy the flu is. It seems like these diseases that are less deadly are also, it's easier to catch them. You touch a handle, a doorknob, you've caught it, Well, this particular virus that's in China right now, it seems like that it's not as deadly. Doesn't seem like it's not as deadly as SARS so far. I mean, okay, we haven't got the real results in yet from masses and what if it moves later because it's a brand new virus, something brand new. It's only like a month old. But I noticed that it seems like it's spreading exponentially within the population. I went on the computer last night and I did a little calculation on my calculator, going by its 30 days. Basically, it's a 30-day-old thing. It's been around for 30 days. And estimates could be as many as 1,000 people have it, And I did the calculations on the calculator, and I can see that this thing is moving fast. Very fast, And one of the things that really concerns me is the fact that it seems like it's moving very fast, what do they call it, virulent, or something, the name for it when it moves quickly and it's very catchy. And the next thing about it is its ability to incapacitate by attacking the lungs and the lung tissue. They say a lot of these patients in China evidently have lung lesions. And their lungs evidently look, in the serious cases of it, their lungs look like they have tuberculosis. Well, a person like that is basically incapacitated. Even if they do survive, it's going to take them a long time to... this thing, if it attacks your lungs like that, it can do more damage and more serious harm than if you were to have harmful habits for, say, 30 years. Or like my father, he was into body work, and there's something that they use called Bondo, which is auto body filler. And he breathed that stuff in for 30 years, and his lungs are still good, you know? There's different habits that people have and things that affect their lungs tissue in a negative way. And this thing could do more damage in a matter of hours than 30 or 40 years of bad habits. I mean, this thing is very dangerous, Now, I personally, it's the Chinese New Year. They're having big celebrations where they're traveling every which way, all over the place, on buses and everything, airplanes and everything else. I'm very concerned, to say the least. And I'm thinking to myself, if this thing does get loose, I mean loose big time, this could be a real black swan event for the entire world, because it's seemingly coming out of nowhere. Everybody's talking about something else. They're always talking about, well, what could cause the financial system to collapse, And there could be a black swan coming that it could cause, and we're ready for a financial collapse of epic proportions. And now all of a sudden we got this thing to deal with? Oh boy, this could be very trying times coming up for the world. Thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe. And, we'll catch you guys in the next show. And give me a thumbs up, guys. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.